Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to this session of the Maryland Virtual Training Institute. This is the Journeying Together, Holding Space for Learning as a Vision and a Tool for Infusing DEIA in Our Lessons. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer: the content or opinions expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect or present the views, positions, or policies of the Maryland Department of Labor, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, organizations imply an official endorsement by the Maryland Department of Labor. Before we get into the presentation, I do want to bring up a very quick poll so we can find out where what everyone's role is. So there should be a poll that just popped up. If you could just take a moment and let us know what your role is in adult education, whether it's something on that list or it's other. I'll give you just a few more moments to vote. Okay, let's go ahead and share results. So I see from the list here today that we have the vast majority of everyone participating are instructors. That is great. I'm really happy that we have so many adult education instructors on this, but we also have some program administrators, instructional specialists, intake assessment specialists, and transition specialists or career coaches. But great that there's so many instructors. So for our webinar today, we do have both the chat open and the Q&A. I would encourage, if you do have a question that comes up during the session, please use the Q&A. It's easier for us to track the questions as they come in, but also feel free to use the chat as well. We will monitor both the chat and the Q&A. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our two speakers today. We're very lucky today to have both Yvonne Suazo as well as Mary Scholl. They're going to be leading us on this journey together, and I will turn it over to them. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Doug. We appreciate it. And hello, everyone. It's so exciting to see your names and the places, either where you're the locations or the institutions where you're working coming in. So great. Thank you so much. Session is, as Doug mentioned, we're journeying together, holding space for learning as a vision and a tool for infusing DEIA in our lessons. And Barbara Franceschini, oh my goodness, how are you showing up here? I didn't know we would know anybody, and we know you. That's beautiful. I love it. Oh gosh, that's so fun. We're going to start out with one of our traditions that we use at the Institute for Collaborative Learning. We're based in Costa Rica. We'll tell you a little bit more about ourselves in just a little bit, but we're going to start out with one of our traditions. And I think Yvonne's going to lead us in this.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, educators, administrators, leaders, and learners. Welcome, everyone who strives to create dynamic learning environments. Welcome, everyone who makes mistakes and fumbles. You are welcome. Welcome, everyone who celebrates success, small and large. Welcome, everyone who is sitting with something that is uncomfortable. Welcome everyone who is striving to be kind and gentle with themselves and with others, including students, colleagues, administrators, parents, family members, community members. Welcome everyone who shows up even when your life feels challenging. Welcome everyone who is remaining curious even when tired or overwhelmed. Welcome everyone who is learning to honor their needs and care for themselves. Welcome everyone who already knows and already practices ways of honoring their needs and caring for themselves. Welcome joy, welcome sadness, welcome hurt, welcome creativity, welcome fear, welcome yearning, welcome curiosity, and welcome celebration. Welcome everyone who is interested in learning about holding space for learning. Welcome everyone who already knows about holding space for learning, and welcome everyone.
We're curious, would anybody like to welcome anything else? This is a welcoming, as you can tell, a welcoming activity that we do, and we do it at the beginning of our sessions and the beginning of our classes, because we want everyone to know that they belong. And so I'm curious, is there anything that you would like us to welcome that would help make you feel like you belong or make your colleagues feel like you belong? And I know it might seem a little funny on this webinar that we can't even see you. So I say, welcome everybody I can't see. Is there anything else that we can welcome? Welcome everyone from Maryland and everybody who's not from Maryland. Anything else you could write in the chat, I think. What else can we welcome? And Yvonne, is there anything you'd like to add to that list?
Yeah, well, welcome educators and learners who are home or at school.
I see that Janice wrote, welcome our differences. Absolutely. Thank you, Janice. Yes, Monica, thank you for that. Welcome highly functional technology and unstable technology. Yeah, welcome those who are tired of being on their computers, and welcome those that are grateful for being on their computers. Yeah. Welcome mothers who educate and a mother of all trades. Welcome those stressed about the semester. Oh, thank you. No, beautiful. Welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. Oh, we've got some good ones coming in here too. Yvonne, do you want to read some?
The chat?
Yeah. Are you following? Do you have the chat on?
Yeah, there's one from Jen saying, welcome everyone who has lost loved one in the past few days. I know of 3 families who lost loved ones in the past week. They are welcome to. Thank you, Sharon.
And welcome experienced and novice educators. Welcome those who feel confident and those who doubt their abilities. Thanks, Elizabeth, too. Yeah, great. Thank you all so much. And John, our hearts go out to you and to all of those people who are experiencing grief right now. I want to introduce ourselves a little bit. My name is Mary Scholl, and my colleague Yvonne Suazo. I'll introduce myself a little bit and pass it off to you, Yvonne. I'm originally from the United States, so you have the little US flag, but I live in Costa Rica. I've been living in Costa Rica for 21 years, and I've been working in adult education for a very long time. We do a lot of teacher training. We do a lot of teaching of English. We also work with community leaders in areas of compassionate communication or nonviolent communication and holding space. So we work at the Institute for Collaborative Learning and also at the Center for Holding Space. And so we're sharing a little bit of both institutions today. And I'm really happy to be with you. Yvonne, you want to share about yourself?
And my name is Ivan, and I am originally from Nicaragua, a neighboring country of Costa Rica. And I live and work here in Costa Rica. I work with Mary, collaborate in different projects with educators and leaders in Latin America. And we also do presentations in some other countries. So it's a pleasure to be with educators in Maryland. Thank you.
Thanks. So today we're going to talk about, let's see. Tefalate says, Costa Rica is a destination vacation dream of yours. It is beautiful. They or whoever told you it was beautiful, they're right. We feel so blessed. I feel so blessed to be here. And we also have challenges with diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility for sure. We're going to talk today about holding space for learning, but we want to just frame it in this I'll share a little bit about frame it in this framework of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. I'm guessing that many of you have seen these pictures before. You've seen the first one on the left where we talk about our reality. It was a meme that was on the internet, where the reality is that that some people have a lot of resources right? And some people have some, and some people have none or less than none. And our idea for equality, and this vision of equality, is that everybody gets the exact same resources. But as the picture shows us, that doesn't mean that we're all going to have the same access to the baseball game or access to learning. So we need to focus on equity, right? Does everybody getting the support they need so that they have access to the learning, access to the baseball game. But then somebody took these two memes further and added in justice and inclusion in these images, which I think are really sweet. So in justice, all three people can see the game without support or accommodation because they took the barrier away, the barrier of the fence. So if you look at universal design for learning work, you're going to see this idea of how do we take away the barriers so that we can all have access to learning without having to have some special accommodations. And then inclusion, somebody added this inclusion meme, which I think is really sweet, is that everybody is included in the game. We're not just watching people play, we're playing. And we find ways that everybody can play within their levels of ability. So it's not just removing a barrier, but it's making sure that people are valued and involved. And we believe, and what we're going to share with you today, is that learning about holding space helps us include everybody. And that's part of the reason we want to share it. We think it's so powerful. It's powerful in the classroom. It's powerful in the office space. It's powerful in our personal and family relationships. So we're pretty excited about being able to share that today. I want to share a few definitions that we are working with, and we just mentioned here that equity is everyone having access to the same opportunities. And they're supported and enforced by group policy and culture. And equity accounts for the imbalances and the unequal starting points and unfair treatment. And I would imagine that in your workplaces, that's something that you all take into consideration and work towards. Inclusion is a step beyond. It's a step beyond. All students, especially those from historically underrepresented identities, feel a sense of belonging and value, and they feel like they matter and that they have the same access to opportunities. So this idea of inclusion is a little bit trickier. I can't just say, you belong, I hope you feel included, right? I can't force that on anyone. So the work that I do is a little bit less, it's less direct than the traditional roles that we have as teachers. And we need to take into account, we need to understand the diversity in our classroom. So this is the presence of difference. So welcome all of our differences here. And in order to understand that, we also have to understand our identities and our multiple identities and our needs, right? So as a teacher, as I start to understand what the labels are that students use to label themselves in their lives, what their identities are, I can start to see and know and learn how to create an inclusive environment for them, with them, maybe with them as much as for them. So we think that holding space is one of those answers to how to do that. So we're excited to share it with you. Yvonne, is there anything you want to add about diversity, equity, inclusion, identity?
It's interesting how to the different concepts play around involving, including everyone, and accepting and embracing students and teachers as we are. So it's beautiful. It's not only understanding that we are different, right? There's also moving any barriers so we not only accept it, but also include it, and we treat us equal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thanks. I'm going to be honest with you, Yvonne. I can't remember if you were going to start this slide or if I was going to start it. I'm happy for either.
You go, Mary. You go.
Okay. All right. So when we look at the world of holding space, one of the things that we start out looking at is our primary needs. And another area that Yvonne and I do a lot of work is nonviolent communication and compassionate communication, where we look at our basic human needs. These are the needs. Every human being has these needs. We might have different strategies to get the needs met, but we all need safety, we all need belonging, and we all need identity. We need to feel like our identity is valued, seen and valued. And what happens in life a lot of times is maybe sometimes for my sense of safety, I have to give up my sense of belonging. Or if I, if I have, I feel like in order to belong, I let go of my identity a little bit. I don't want to show everybody my identity, or I might not feel safe showing my identity because I want to belong, right? And so when we think about holding space, one of the things that we're really trying to do to become have a well-resourced classroom is we want everyone to feel like they belong. We want everyone to feel like their identity is welcome. And we want everyone to feel enough safety that they can take the risks to learn, right? So when we think about our students in our classrooms, and whether they're children or adults, I know right now we're working with adult learning, but I feel like this is for everyone. We, as a teacher, I think about how, and it's not perfect, right? I can't always say that everyone's need for safety is always going to be met. We're going to have some conflict. We're going to have some challenges where somebody might feel like they're they're feeling vulnerable and they're needing to take care of themselves. I'm not, everyone's need for belonging is not always going to be fully met. But if I have these needs in my mind as a teacher, I can start to think slightly differently about how I work on co-creating the environment with the students. And we can tell that people's enough of their needs for safety, identity, and belonging are met when people are participating authentically, right? When they're really offering their genuine answers. Or for me, sometimes if a student says no to me, I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. And so they feel safe enough that they can just say, no, Mary, I don't believe that, or I don't want to do that. And when our students are able to balance their own needs with others' needs and can really support each other's learning, that's another sign that we're well-resourced. When they take leadership on their own learning, when they're self-directed learners, that's another sign. And when they're resilient and courageous, and when they're able to make good decisions, that's another sign that they're well-resourced. Holding space is a way that I can work with this idea of how do we see what people's needs are and help them get them met.
I'm also thinking about the impact of these co-creating safe environments where we can satisfy the primary needs. Thinking about students in a classroom, and they come to my classroom, and then they can see everyone's needs. I can see my needs, and I can see other needs, and we can work together to try to satisfy our needs. Impact coming into a classroom, and we all creating these environments, and then perhaps in these environments, so we can all see each one's needs and do our best to support each other to meet our primary needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So some of the core questions that we ask each other are, in my classroom, who belongs? Who feels like they belong? What identities are seen and valued? Do students feel enough of a sense of safety in order to be brave? Yeah, the sound was cutting in and out. I'm not quite sure what to do about that. It was cutting in and out for me too. Is my sound cutting in and out right now?
So at this point, I can hear you just fine. Your video is a little choppy, but for Yvonne, it did cut out. I think it might just be a connection issue. So if we miss something, I'll make sure that we ask to repeat it. So
awesome. Please do. Please do. Yeah. I appreciate that feedback. What are the barriers to belonging in our classroom, belonging, safety, and identity? These are the questions I'm really like, I think about and think, what can I do so that how can we facilitate so that there's greatest possibility for students to have their needs for belonging, safety, and identity met? Because it's going to help them learn. It's going to help them be ready to learn in our classrooms. So those are our core questions. And I'm going to shift into a little bit of what learning and teaching used to be seen as. I think some people did, at least, as giving and receiving knowledge. If I have knowledge, I want to become a teacher so I can give it to my students, right? And my role as a teacher was to share knowledge. I think for me, it's always been different with this, but with the pandemic now, it's even more so. Knowledge is everywhere. And our job is, I share knowledge, but I don't think it's the biggest part of our job. Because now I think that it's pretty clear that learning happens in these dynamic interactions between the people involved. Right? So I might put knowledge in the middle, or I might put some information in the middle or a resource in the middle of the classroom. But it's how the students interact that really gets them learning, right? So my job is to create an environment where learning hopefully will happen. Right? And that's my definition of teaching that I've been working with for a long time. Now I've modified it just a little bit. And my job in terms of holding space is to lead the co-creation of the environment. It's not just me, it's me and all of my students together. We're creating this environment. And holding space is a very powerful way to do that. So when we hold space, we are co-creating the conditions where people's primary needs get met. Right? So if our need for safety, belonging, and identity are met enough, we will be ready to learn. Right? I see Douglas writes, a dynamic interactions can be especially impactful with adult learners, as the traditional model of an instructor that just as imparting information to students could be what led our adult learners to struggle with traditional education. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's so hard to sit in those chairs and just copy things down, right? Or just listen. Yeah. That's our active learning and how important it is, especially with our adult learners and especially with our international learners. I'm not sure how many of you all have international students, but I think that can also be a really hard, the language piece. It can be very hard if I have to just sit and listen to someone talking like Yvonne and I are doing today. Just talking to you all. Our apologies. All right. Another part of another way of thinking about holding space is that it's what we do when we, oh no, there's a phone ringing here someplace. Hold on. No, sorry. No. Oh, technology. The phone was ringing, but I couldn't figure out where to turn it off. I hope you didn't hear it. Over 50% of Maryland's adult learners are English language learners. Okay, great. And we're in the same boat. That's what we're talking about. So holding space is this journey that I take. I am accompanying my learners in their journey. It's a very different stance than the traditional model of imparting information, right? I'm accompanying them. And when we talk about the journey, we're talking about them going through this liminal space. And we're going to talk a little bit more. We have a few slides about this idea of what liminal space is. But on this journey, we're going to do it. We don't want to make them feel inadequate. We don't want to try to fix them. And we're not actually trying, as much as we want our students to learn, we want the outcome to be in their hands, right? Hi, Melanie. I do see that some participants are contributing to the chat, so we can see it. Maybe, I don't know if you can see it, but we can see it here. Thanks for that. So, Yvonne, anything you want to add in here about the holding space piece?
Thank you. Yeah, I love the idea of moving away from the perspective of right or wrong, good or bad, my good student, my bad student, and just walking alongside with students and just accompanying students in the process. Especially when because if you have 50% of your students language learners, that will be challenging by skills, right? Like pronunciation or reading or writing. In my case, one of the most difficult skills for me is writing in English, writing essays. So it's just being with students, walking with them, learning with them, and from them. So that's beautiful, this perspective of holding space for students, especially when they're in a liminal space.
Let's talk a little bit more about the liminal space. So there's different kinds of spaces in which learning happens. The physical space, right, in the classroom, online, in nature, or even in the world outside, right? I imagine with 50% of your students are English language learners, they're going to be learning a lot in the communities there, right? So there's these different physical kinds of spaces. There's also this intangible, maybe invisible, maybe not invisible space in which learning happens. It's the relational space, right? It's the space between people and the inner space inside of us. And that's sort of a little bit harder to talk about, but it is the really powerful, powerful space. And when I become more aware of that relational space and that inside space and how to work with it, I think I can be a more effective teacher, for sure. So there's the relational. And now I want to talk a little bit about liminal space. And we're going to be using this metaphor of nature to talk about the liminal space. It's kind of like you have one reality, and then you go inside. So this is the reality A, is that we have a caterpillar here, right? And then the caterpillar goes inside of its, oh my gosh, my words are inside the chrysalis. I lost the word for a minute. Inside the chrysalis. And they make all these changes. And when they come out of the chrysalis, there's a new reality. Now they're a butterfly. Right? So that chrysalis time, when they do this amazing transformation, that's what we're calling the liminal space. And the liminal space is messy. It's something that, as a teacher, I'm not controlling what happens in that liminal space. I'm creating a container so the student can do their work, right? And so that the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis and they do their work, and they come out transformed into a butterfly. But the chrysalis doesn't change the caterpillar. The caterpillar changes the caterpillar, right? So our role in holding space for learning is basically to be a container, so that we're creating this space, a safe space for the students to learn, for the students to be brave enough to learn, right? And it might be chaotic, it might be messy, there might be fear. This quote, it comes from Heather Platt, who wrote a book called The Art of Holding Space. And she started the Center for Holding Space, where both Yvonne and I are serving as facilitators also right now. And when she wrote it, she was thinking about leadership, and she was thinking about life in general. And we're taking it and applying it specifically into the classroom. If I want my students to be included, that I need to work on ways to really hold space for everyone and all their identities and their needs for belonging, their needs for their safety, and also their need for their identities to be held and valued. So this is a metaphor that we're using for holding space. We're using for the liminal space. The liminal space to me, is a place where the learning takes place. It's where we make mistakes, where we try things out, where we test things. And my reality A, it could be something as simple as not knowing how to, my reality is I don't know how to present myself in English. I go into the liminal space and I learn the vocabulary, I learn the grammar, I learn some phrases, I practice them, it's a little messy. I develop a sense of confidence. And then my new reality B is I can present myself in English. Right? So it could be as simple as that. It also could be a shift in identity. I don't think I'm an English speaker. And then I go to my English classes and I go out into my community and I try it out and it works and it's a little hard, but I keep practicing. And then my reality B becomes like, oh, I can actually speak English. Right? There can be other kinds of transitions too. You can use the word liminal space for physical spaces, like going through down a stairway or a hallway or a bridge, that you're crossing through this, it's like this physicality of crossing from one side of something to another. It could be an emotional change, changing in your family, moving through conflict. You know, when we were talking about people who are in grief, when you're in grief because you've lost people, that is a liminal space. You go from the reality of someone being alive into this space of grief and loss, and it takes time to assimilate it and have that become part of your reality until you have a sort of a new story that you're living where that person is no longer physically with us. Right? There also can be intellectual changes, right? Moving from one paradigm to another, or what, like I said, the skill of presenting oneself from one thing to another, or going through a sense-making process, you know, where something doesn't make sense, and then you work with it in the liminal space, and then eventually does make sense, and you have a new understanding. Yeah.
I'm also thinking about the container, being the container when holding space for students. The size, the shape, the depth of the container. So it sounds like each student is going through different liminal space. So it's beautiful just to be the container and hold space for students, wherever they are, as they are. And then creating these conditions for students to feel safe so they can, their space can be held.
And you know, Yvonne, I'm guessing that many people listening already do this. This might just be another way of describing what they do. It might not be something new, but it might be something, some sort of clarity or power in hearing about this particular label. Yeah, I'm curious. But I see that it's my role as an educator is to hold space for learning. Right? Co-creating the environment where learning can happen. And we also like a chrysalis. Another image that we use is a bowl. We use the idea of a bowl a lot. I'm creating a container. When people learn, they're kind of inside. When they come in my classroom, I always think of it as like, that's my bowl that they're coming into. Oh, thanks, Douglas, for sharing that. You haven't heard the concept described in this way as holding space. Does it sound familiar though? Like what we're actually talking about, what you're doing? Does that sound familiar to you as either an administrator or as an instructor? Got it. Yes, it hits the right notes. Well, thanks. Yeah, Monica says it's almost like paradigm shifts. Absolutely. It is. It's a paradigm shift about how I envision my work as an instructor or as an educator. Right? And I love the word facilitator. We talk about, you know, my job is to facilitate learning, but there's something to me even more powerful about holding space, because facilitation is part of holding space, but it's not everything. Right? There's other ways. And part of this quote I like about this Harrison Owen quote about holding space is that it's an opportunistic role. It depends on, and you do this. I know you all do this. I know it, even though I don't know you. I just know Barbara Franceschini, but I know that teachers do this, right? You read the environment and you're like, how are we going to respond based on what these people need? Right. And so if we say, look at that, we have this role as educators to this opportunistic role. So it's not something I can necessarily write into my lesson plan. I could put space in my lesson plan, but I can't necessarily say, okay, I'm going to be holding space right now for X, Y, and Z. It's a role that I do in response to understanding, and I have a very clear sense of myself and my purpose and my capacity and my limitations in showing up and holding space for people, right? Holding space and time requires that you be fully present, available, open, truthful, and having no real agenda. I mean, Yvonne and I have this agenda, we have these slides, we want to tell you about it. But if I forget a word or I forget, like, how are we going to handle this? Was I going to speak first? Was he going to speak first? I'm just being honest about it in the moment. It's not, some people might think, oh, a big deal, they're not ready. And there might be some judgment brain coming in for sure. But for me, it's more about how do Yvonne and I interact here and hold space together. And it's part of being present. So, Tefellate, I see your, oh, go ahead, Yvonne.
I love what you're saying there, just being present and accept what is and moving away from judgment or thoughts, being distracted by thoughts, just being present. I love what you're saying. It's great. It's great. It's for educators in different contexts, like when giving a presentation, when teaching a class, when giving feedback, observing students in the learning trajectory. Yes, beautiful. Just to be present. It's a key.
It's not simple either to be present, is it? I see Tefellate writes, or Tefellate Anya writes, yes, we learn how to correlate between student and educator and holding space and understanding and training. We become both the space holder or learner and educator. Each one teach one and help to reach one. Yes, absolutely. And Elizabeth writes, are there practices you found to be helpful to facilitate holding space for type A instructors? Yes, we have practices for all types of instructors. Absolutely. But I'm reading into your question, Elizabeth, when you say type A, is that somebody who really wants to have a lot of control over everything every minute? Because I can see how that might be really challenging. This would be a challenging paradigm. And I think it's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful question. And my first answer, we do have a list of we have a slide here with a list of some of the things that we do when we're holding space. It's a mixture of me learning about what's happening with me that I want this kind of control. Where is it coming from? And so it's like about my relationship with myself if I'm a type A. And then it's also what's the capacity of my learners and how do I really believe in them and their capacity and support that. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the suggestion to change it to everyone. I'm not sure if that can be done in this particular session or if it had to be done ahead of time, but we will be reading out all of the messages just so you know. Let's see, I'm going to skip over. So some of the things that we do, and Elizabeth, you were asking, this is one of the slides I was thinking of, but it's a very general one. I have one other slide that talks about specific holding space skills, but like inside of our bowls that we create, in our containers that we create, we do a lot of listening and observing and sharing knowledge and planning and organizing activities and motivating and inspiring students, and we track and prove. We do all of these things, right? But when we do them from a holding space perspective, we are less type A, right? We're less type A, we're less wanting to control and more sort of flowing. And I understand too, like sometimes we'll have teachers say, but I have 40 students in my class. And how do I do this with 40 students in my class? And my first answer is always that you are the expert in your classroom. And you'll take this information and think, wow, what does it mean to me? What am I curious about? And what do I want to experiment? What can I experiment with my own students? And I trust that if this is of interest to you, that you will find something that you experiment with, and then my hope would be that you continue experimenting until you find ways, if it continues to feel interesting, that you find ways that you're realizing that you are holding space for learning as opposed to trying to control learning or manipulate people into learning, which sometimes we do, and I have done.
And Mary, that's not an extensive list of things teachers do in the classroom. There might be other practices you are doing in your classroom that also work for holding space for students.
Yeah. And what we're offering is we would do this from a stance of wanting to hold space. And so the question really is, what's a healthy environment for learning? Right? If we to create that, how do we envision that, show up and navigate the healthy space? And what I would love to, actually, let's do this. I think we have time to have people write their answers in the chat here. How do you describe a healthy environment for learning? What are some things that you put? And we can see it. I don't know if everybody else can see it, but when you write it, we'll say it out loud. Julie writes, where everyone feels safe. Cynthia, everyone's valued. A welcoming environment. Where everyone feels safe. Inclusive conversation, guided interaction, respected, active learning, collaboration, great interaction in class, where everyone can breathe. Yeah. Lowered affective filters, students speak respectfully to each other. There's a brave space. Yes, Deirdre, moving from safe space to brave space. Absolutely. There's a feeling of community and family, acceptance, warmth, concern. Differences are respected, accepted, not judged, allowed to make mistakes without judgment. Yeah, beautiful. Calling on students to give answers without their fear of being wrong. Yeah, on all students. Yeah. There is some fascinating work by this organization called the Deans for Impact. If you haven't found this yet in all of your free time where you want to be learning this, I highly recommend it. The Science of Learning. It summarizes existing research, the cognitive scientific research on how students learn, and connects it to practical implications. It's really interesting. And as an experienced educator and also new educators, I feel like the information they share with us is something that's really, really helpful. And Tafalate and Anaya wrote, open space for everyone to learn, eliminating any spectrums of one feeling ostracized or afraid to share. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, Monica writes, when students say or do things incorrectly and it's viewed as no big deal, no judgment. Yeah, in fact, it's also viewed as an opportunity. Like, hey, what's the best mistake you made today, right? Let's celebrate that. What are we getting from that? Yeah. So the Science of Learning asks these 6 questions. They ask, how do students understand new ideas? How do they learn and retain information? How do they solve problems? Transferring to new situations? What really motivates them? And what are some common misconceptions? We're just going to share here a few things that they mentioned that really are present in healthy learning environments. True. Students are intrinsically motivated. They reference ideas that they already know. They monitor their own learning and thinking, being able to say what they do know and what they don't know, right? And some of you all mentioned this in terms of making mistakes or feeling safe. They're open to discussion. You mentioned that. Many of you mentioned this, that sense of belonging and promoting a sense of belonging for everyone. Students are meaningfully organizing concepts and materials. They're actually doing some higher level cognitive work, and they're able to handle that. Their focus is on meaning, and they're interacting with feedback from the teacher. Right? That we're actually giving them feedback about their learning and they're interacting with it. These are all signs of a healthy learning environment. And they're all signs for me that I'm also able to hold space for my students' learning. There is a longer list. We're not going to go too deep into it, but if you go into the research and the science of learning, you can find it. And I think it's really useful here, referencing they know, time to think for themselves, exploring problems. Let's see. Oh, the author for Science of Learning it's a website called Deans for Impact. Let me see. I think I have it written on this slide. There we go. Can you see this here? deansforimpact.org. Yeah, you're welcome, Ellie or Eli. So that's how I look at it. Like, that's a healthy environment. And I still go back to that same question, but how do you do that? Right? How does holding space lead us to this? All right. So let's see, let's get through these lists. And how do you not do it? And we want to give you some examples here of when you're not holding space, right? If I'm not able to hold space, so if my need for safety is activated, my need for belonging is activated, if my need for identity is activated, I'm not going to be able to hold space so well. And I'll be more inclined to do something called hijacking space, taking over somebody else's space. Oh, thank you, both Douglas and Ilan. Yeah, that's great. Oh, Douglas, you can write to everyone. Douglas, you have power. Yay, that's great. Yvonne and I just have it to the hosts and the panelists, but that's okay. So we want to bring in this idea of hijacking space to sort of say, well, what is the opposite of holding space? And it's a concept that Heather brings up in her book. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples from my teaching. When Yvonne and I were starting to talk about this last year or 2 years ago, the word hijacking, Yvonne, do you want to explain it? Do you want how that was in the other metaphor that we came up with instead of hijacking?
You go ahead, Mary, and I can add more.
Oh, okay. Well, we came up with another metaphor because the concept of hijacking was just a little too violent for, you know, in his background. That was a real violent reality, and so he didn't want to use the word hijack. He came up with the idea of driving a car, and that each student is driving their own car, and as a teacher, I'm driving my car. So we're driving around our classroom. And if I'm hijacking space, I'm trying to get into my student's car and start driving their car for them. Right? As opposed to recognizing that they can be driving their own car and do their own learning. For those of you that are doing English language teaching, I've studied a little bit of the silent way with Caleb Gutenyo. He used to have one of my favorite quotes from him was that never do for your students what they can do for themselves. And I would say, Caleb Gutenyo would have said, don't ever hijack their space. Really always make sure that students are able to do the most amount of the work that they can. But in the world of holding space, we're using the term hijacking space. And I don't want us to blame ourselves. I want to say, oh my God, I'm a bad person because I hijack space. We need to actually understand why we hijack space. And often we do it because we haven't had a model of something different. Our traditional models of education don't necessarily teach us how to hold space. It also could be if I'm triggered, or if you're asking Elizabeth about that sort of the type A teacher. Sometimes I just wonder, where does that need for control come from? Am I afraid that if I don't control things that students will fail? Am I afraid of holding their failure or their pain? Am I uncomfortable with someone else's discomfort? Right? Do I not believe they can do it? Or sometimes if I'm tired or stressed out, I just want to control the situation to make it easier for me. I'm guilty of that for sure. I really have experienced that. Or if I feel unsafe, sometimes I'll hijack space. So, as a teacher, and then also as students, because I'll have my students hijack each other's spaces, right? I'll ask my students a question, or I'll ask, see if I can get one particular student, they're working on something, and another student will want to give them the answer, as opposed to help them have space to work through the answer themselves, which will help their learning more. Let's see, Peg writes, in the virtual arena, space is difficult to maintain. I totally agree with that. Absolutely, it requires a different kind of relating with each other in our virtual classrooms. And Vicky writes, for you, it's you don't want your students to fail. Exactly. I hear you on that.
For me, Mary, the question came when translated, finding an equivalent in Spanish for hijacking the space. And then in Spanish, we use a similar term for hijacking and kidnapping. And then being in a country, in a context where police were kidnapping students, teachers, leaders. So it was hard for me to talk to people about the term. So what was the conversation about? Well, how if we find a different term? But it's so interesting because for me, it's something I do. And sometimes I'm not aware that I'm hijacking the space of a student, of another teacher, just bringing the answer. But I value, one of my primary needs is safety. And when I see somebody's not safe, I jump in and I try to do something, fix, repair. It's because I'm hijacking the space. Somebody is in the liminal space, it's unsafe. And I don't want that person to be unsafe, but it's my safety, what I'm working on.
Yeah, it's hard to, I think it's hard to really create space to watch students struggle, to hold space for them. I mean, even though they are, we don't, and so for me, sometimes the question is how much struggle is enough and how much is too much, and how do I balance that out? I want to give you a couple practical examples of me not holding space, and what I would do now after holding space, right? After learning about holding space. So the first one was in the structure of a paragraph. Maybe I'll just tell one of them in the interest of time. We only have a few minutes left. I was teaching English in Japan. This was many years ago. I lived in Japan for 8 years. I was at a university teaching writing class. And after class one day, my student Yumiko came into my office and she said, Mary, this was horrible. Class was horrible today. I want to quit. And I was like, oh no, I'm so sorry. Like what happened? And first of all, the fact that she could come in and tell me that meant that I could hold enough space for her discomfort. And so that was a good sign. But when she told me, she's like, Mary, today's class was way too hard. I didn't get it. I think I'm stupid. I don't understand. And I sat and thought about it for a minute with her. And I was like, yeah, today was pretty hard, wasn't it? So I was holding space for her in the moment. I was like, let's think about why it was hard. And I realized I was trying to cover way too much material. I was hijacking the space of my students' learning by dumping tons of material because I realized we only had like 3 classes left and we had to finish the term and they had to get this. And so I was putting a lot of pressure. I was moving quickly, more quickly than I usually moved. And so I was sort of hijacking their space because I had my agenda of content. So that was just an example of, I wasn't able to move with them. And it's an interesting tension that we hold when we work at institutions where there are certain goals and objectives that have to be met, but then students are working at a certain pace. It's like this tension and balance that we have to work out and trying to figure out how to move through that. We did a project. We worked in the Dominican Republic for about 7 years doing teacher training, which was pretty amazing, just before the pandemic, 7 years or so before the pandemic. And this is a photo that I took that I love. I love. The students, they have, you can see this, that there's something going on. You can see that, that there's some activity going on here. And the teacher was actually trying to get these students, they were doing some kind of activity. But what I loved was this student right here, leaning dangerously back on his chair, reading a book. And later on, we talked with the teacher and we were doing some feedback. And I was saying, how about Jose Manuel right there? And she's like, I saw him. I was so excited that he was reading a book. That's really amazing. You know, and so what was beautiful is that it was okay for him to not be participating in class because he was doing something that was really helping. He was intrinsically motivated to learn and do right there. And so it's just interesting to me that particular photo is a nice photo of how a teacher was holding space for different kinds of space for lots of students learning in that moment. This is another really practical example. It's an exam from a situation here in Costa Rica. And I'm going to show you this example here where there's some instructions and then the student answers them. So it says, look at that means the picture. It says imagen about different things in different countries, write a correct questions and answers according to the pictures. So the question is that suitcase made in Italy? The answer, no, it isn't made. No, it is made in China is what the student wrote. And the teacher corrected her. She wanted the student to be using tag questions. The instructions didn't say that. They just said question and answer, right? So for me, the teacher correcting that student is not holding space for their learning because the student answered those instructions correctly. That the teacher needed to have more specific. If they really wanted to use a tag question, she would need to put that in the instructions. And it was very interesting because the student, after this exam, the student came to me and was crushed and said, I hate English. I don't ever want to study it. Hate my teacher, blah, blah, blah. Because I think the student knew that she had actually done quite well. She just hadn't answered things in the way that the teacher had imagined, but not written. Okay. And she was afraid to talk to the teacher about it. When the parent of the student went and talked to the teacher said, oh, okay, I get that. I see that. So it's an interesting experience of like marking that wrong to me is not holding space for learning. It's not seeing, these are all the other questions where she did the exact same pattern. So she got everything wrong, even though it's all grammatically correct and the meaning is correct. So those are an example. And this is some of my list. Elizabeth, you had asked like the list of some things that we do when we hold space. We notice our needs for safety and belonging. We understand the difference between influence and control. We witness and honor emotions, exercise flexibility. We foster brave space. We maintain our hearts at peace, right? We choose curiosity and we invite joy, right? We avoid blame and shame. So this is one of the lists that we have. Yeah. We've come to our 60 minutes and I'm excited. And Elizabeth, I see that, yeah, but it's true how we give instructions makes a huge difference. And Peg, I'm so glad to see that yes, it's not simple to do these things. We want to invite you, if you'd like to, I don't know if there's time for you to write in the chat how this has impacted you. We do have our emails here. We'll leave our slides with Doug as well. If you're interested in a course for yourself as a teacher and a human being, there's an online course starting soon, March 6th, called Know Yourself, Free Yourself with Heather. That's a really great course and interesting. And there's a list of some references and resources in our slides as well.
Douglas, you can share, if you don't mind sharing the link in the chat, the link of the course.
No problem. So while I'm typing this in, I just want to thank you both, Mary and Yvonne, for sharing this with us today. This has been really amazing. I know that probably for everyone that's on this, you probably want to go back and watch it again. So by next week, we will have the recording of this available to you. And also, whenever we close this today, there will be a evaluation we'd like you to complete. So if you take a minute and do that for us. But thank you both so much for all of your help today and for leading us through this talk. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Before I close it out, I just want to put the last link here so everyone gets access to that.
Thank you.
Barbara, great to see you too. I'm excited to see some interest. There are other courses at the Center for Holding Space that will be coming up next year as well. We both teach on the Foundations program, which is an 8-month course. It's just one phone call a week and a lot of amazing information and great community. I think the biggest thing we can do is learn ourselves first, and then you'll find ways to incorporate that into your classroom for sure.
Okay, thank you both so much. All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. And we
Yeah.
look forward to seeing everyone with the Virtual Training Institute again tomorrow.
Thank you all. Thanks.
you.
Great to see you, Barbara.
Thank you, Douglas.
Thank
Thank
you.